The original state of man was clearly a blessed one, but as we know from Revelation, unfortunately, it did not last very long. And the situation of the fall comes in even in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Yahweh, God, had said to them they could eat any of the trees in the garden, but they could not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But already there was a creature who had fallen, or there were creatures who had fallen, namely some of the angels who had fallen. That's revealed to us, of course, in this story in Genesis, even perhaps back in the 1st chapter of Genesis, when it says that God separated the darkness from the light. For some of the church fathers, that's also a kind of an allusion to the issue of the separation of the good angels from the evil angels. So already there was sin in creation, and the devil comes, and as we know, he tempts Adam and he tempts Eve, and they fail the test. One thing that's important to point out here is that this is in no way a myth. This is truly history. Now, of course, it's history which is told not in a kind of Wikipedia style, or indeed in a style of modern historical literature, but it is still history. The Pontifical Biblical Commission, for example, in 1909, makes explicitly this point that it's history, and it says, at least in terms of the way it's explained certain things, at least, and this is not exhaustive, but it says at least these following things need to be understood as being taught as truly having happened, namely the creation of all things by God, the special creation of man, the fact that the woman was created from the man, the fact that there really was an original temptation and an original fall, and a prophecy of the coming Saviour. Whether we have to understand the tree as a literal tree or not, it doesn't say that, but it doesn't say we can't, and it seems to me, unless we have good reason to think otherwise, then we would take it simply as a physical tree. But whatever it is actually telling us that there was a kind of primordial test. In terms of this question of the relationship of history and myth, I like to put it this way, at least if I'm teaching my American students, I would say, hey, what about the following story? If I say a story like this: once upon a time, there was a king, an evil king, who so suppressed his subjects that they just despaired. They cut down some of the trees, they built boats, they sailed far across the ocean and came to a land of milk and honey, and on the land they spread like a vine. But the evil king, back on his throne across the seas, thought, I want some of that wealth, I want that honey, I want that milk. And he sent some of his henchmen across to cut down that vine. But the vine rose up and threw those men back into the sea, and ever since has spread its gentle growth across the lands. Something like that, of course, I'm sort of ad-libbing a bit there. But then I say to the students, okay, what's that? And at least most of the American students will say, well, I think you're probably telling us the story of the American Revolution. If I said it to the sort of a bunch of British students, they probably wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. But at least to most of my American students, they understand that. And then I say to them, well, is my little sort of rant there, or my little spiel there, is that history? And they'll mostly be prepared to accept that it is history. Why? Because I am at least trying to assert things which happened. I might use a kind of poetic way of expressing myself, but I am truly asserting what happened. And compare that, for example, to something like Lord of the Rings or to The Hobbit. Now, both of those stories have lots and lots of perennial truths buried in them. The perennial truth that it's a dangerous thing to go outside your front door, or whatever it may be, any of the truths you want to take from Lord of the Rings or Hobbit. They are perennial, and they can have great value to know them, but there's no way in which Tolkien is trying to assert that what happened in The Hobbit or what happened in Lord of the Rings are actually things which happened. That is not what is going on in Genesis. Even if it uses an archaic or poetic form of expressing itself, it is seeking to really affirm that these things happened. So to that degree, we must certainly accept that this is history.